The snow had melted at last upon the scorched stones of King's Landing, seeping into the cracks where fire had once danced, running like tears through the broken teeth of the city's shattered walls. The stench of burned flesh had faded, but the memory lingered, embedded in the very mortar. In the eyes of those who had survived the storm, yet from ashes came a cautious hope, and above the Red Keep's battered spires, the black and red banner of House Targaryen rippled in the spring wind. The throne room was different now. The great iron chair had not been melted to slag in dragonflame, as so many whispered it might be. Instead, Daenerys Stormborn had ordered it scrubbed, every blade cleaned of blood, every bit of bone and viscera scraped away until nothing remained but cold iron. Where once the Iron Throne had stood in shadow, now sunlight fell through the broken windows, pouring across the steps like molten gold. Scaffolding stretched up into the vaults, and the voices of workmen echoed, replacing the screams that had haunted this hall only days before. Daenerys sat upon the throne, not slouched, not lounging, but poised, straight-backed, as if the ancient steel itself had seeped into her bones. She wore no crown, only a circlet of simple silver upon her brow, and her gown was a practical shade of gray, marked only by the subtle embroidery of dragons at her cuffs. Beside her stood Tyrion Lannister, hands folded behind his back, his hair tousled by the wind that slipped through the broken glass. His eyes, quick and clever, missed nothing. Today, the hall was filled not with courtiers, but with the injured, the hungry, the lost. Sir Davos Seaworth moved among them with a word here, a hand there, helping a crippled boy to kneel, offering a rag to a woman whose dress still bore the stains of her husband's blood. The unsullied, those who had followed their queen from Astapor and Meereen, stood in silent rows along the walls, their spears upright, their faces as blank as ever. Outside, somewhere in the city, Drogon slept, his bulk a dark hill among the ruins. The first petitioner, a baker whose shop had burned to the ground, stepped forward. She trembled as she spoke, voice wavering, eyes never meeting the queen's. Her plea was simple: wood to rebuild, flour to feed the hungry, coin to hire laborers. Daenerys listened in silence, her expression grave. Her eyes, so often compared to amethysts, softened by something like understanding. When the woman had finished, Tyrion stepped forward, voice gentle but firm, weaving together promises with practical solutions. He spoke of storehouses outside the city, of ships bringing wheat from the Reach, of men to clear the wreckage. When the baker stumbled, Daenerys herself rose and descended the steps, taking the woman's hand in both of hers. "We will not abandon you," she said, her voice echoing to the rafters. "Not now, not ever. You have my word." The woman wept then, not the wild, hopeless weeping of despair, but the trembling, choking sobs of someone who dares after all to believe. Daenerys held her for a moment, then helped her up, nodding to Sir Davos, who led her gently away. When the hall had emptied at last, when the cries and pleas had faded into the echoes of stone and wind, Tyrion approached the throne, his steps slow but sure. "You made a promise," he said, voice low, words meant for Daenerys alone. She looked at him, and something passed between them, an understanding forged in fire and blood, yet tempered now by something gentler. "Promises are all I have left, Lord Tyrion. That and a broken city." He smiled, crooked and rueful. "A city can be mended. The realm has seen worse. So have you." She looked away then, out the shattered windows to where the sun set over the Blackwater Rush, gilding the ruins in pale light. For a moment she was not a queen but a girl from Dragonstone, a beggar's daughter dreaming of home. "I will not be my father," she said at last. "Not here. Not anywhere." "Blah." Tyrion nodded. "No, your grace, you will not." Later, as the sun fell and the shadows crept long across the city, Daenerys walked the streets of King's Landing, cloaked and hooded, her guards at a distance. She moved among the people, not as a ruler dispensing justice, but as a woman seeking to understand. She listened to their fears, their hopes, their fury. She saw the scars the fire had left, not only on stone but on flesh and spirit. She heard children crying for fathers who would not return, saw mothers scrubbing soot from walls that would never be clean again, In a square near Flea Bottom, a group of children played amid the rubble, their laughter high and clear. They tossed stones at a pile of broken masonry, pretending it was a dragon. One of them, a boy with hair the color of old straw, spotted her in the shadows. He pointed, and the game stopped. Daenerys knelt. "Don't be afraid." The children stared, wide-eyed and silent. "You're the Dragon Queen," the boy said, awe and terror mingling in his voice. "I am," she replied, "but I'm also just a woman, and I'm sorry for the pain my coming has brought." The boy's gaze did not waver. "Will you burn us if we are bad?" The question struck her like a blow. For a heartbeat, she could not speak. Then she shook her head. "No, I will not. I came to free you, not to harm you. But freedom is not easy, and sometimes it costs more than we wish to pay." He seemed to consider this, then nodded gravely, as if accepting the weight of it. The children drifted away, returning to their game. Daenerys stood, watching them until the last light faded from the sky. When she returned to the Red Keep, she found Tyrion waiting in her solar, poring over a map of the city. He looked up as she entered, and his gaze searched her face for something. Doubt, perhaps, or despair. "There is much to be done," he said. "There always is," she answered, crossing to stand beside him. The map was dotted with colored stones, red for ruins, green for places spared by the fire, black for wells and cisterns, blue for the new camps of the displaced. She traced a finger along the river, noting where bridges had fallen, where refugees clustered on the banks. "You see everything," she said. "I try." He hesitated. "But it is you they must follow, Your Grace. I can speak, and I can plan, but only you can make them believe again." She nodded, her eyes heavy with exhaustion. "Help me, Tyrion. Help me build something better." He set his hand atop hers, gentle. "I will, if you will let me." That night, in the stillness of her chambers, Daenerys dreamed of fire, of wings spread wide over a city of stone, of her father's laughter echoing down dark corridors. But when she woke, it was not madness that lingered, but a quiet resolve. She would not let the past define her. She would not let the world decide her fate. She was Daenerys Stormborn, the last dragon, and she would build, not burn. The days became a blur. Meetings, councils, endless lines of petitioners. Sir Davos brought word from the docks. New ships had arrived, laden with grain and salted fish from the Stormlands, with timber and tools from the Vale. Grey Worm, silent and grim, oversaw the clearing of the worst rubble, his unsullied working alongside the city's men and women, building trust one stone at a time. But not all was well. In the shadows, old loyalties smoldered. The gold cloaks, once the proud defenders of the city, simmered with resentment, their numbers thinned by war and suspicion. Lords from the Reach and Dorne arrived daily, each bearing grievances, each expecting favors for their support. The remnants of House Lannister, scattered, wounded, yet unbroken, waited, watching for signs of weakness. Tyrion managed the court with a deft hand, balancing promises with practicalities, wielding wit as deftly as a sword. He placated angry merchants, soothed wounded pride, and reminded all who would listen that peace was a delicate thing, easily shattered. One afternoon, as the small council convened in the solar, Daenerys listened as Tyrion outlined the day's business. Beside him sat Sir Davos, loyal as ever. Across the table, the new master of coin, a canny woman from Gulltown, ran her fingers through the ledgers. Grey Worm, ever silent, watched with unblinking eyes. "The cost of rebuilding grows by the day," Tyrion said. "The city is hungry, but so is the crown. We have debts to Bravos, to the Iron Bank, to every lord who sent ships or soldiers." Daenerys folded her hands. "And yet, if we do not rebuild, there will be no realm to rule." Tyrion nodded. "We must strike a balance, tax the merchants, but not too harshly, offer incentives to those who invest in the city, and perhaps a festival, something to remind the people that life endures." Davos smiled. "A new spring, Your Grace. A feast for those who have little. It would go a long way." Daenerys considered this. See to it, but do not take more than they can give. The city bleeds still. As the council broke up, Tyrion lingered. You should rest, your grace. You cannot mend a kingdom on 3 hours sleep. Demned. She managed a faint smile. I will rest when the realm is whole. He shook his head, admiration mingling with worry. Stubborn as any Lannister. Stubborn as any Targaryen, she countered. Outside the city, the fields bloomed again, green pushing through blackened earth. Refugees returned in trickles, then in streams, drawn by the promise of work and food. The scars would never fully heal, but the bones of the city were strong. One morning, Daenerys stood upon the walls and watched the sunrise. Drogon circled overhead, his shadow sweeping the ground like the hand of fate. Tyrion joined her, cloak flapping in the wind. They're beginning to call you the Mother of Renewal, he said. She watched the light dance on the river. It is a better name than Queen of Ashes. He smiled. Names matter. So do stories. Let them tell this one. They stood in silence, the wind carrying the sounds of hammers, of laughter, of a city beginning at last to breathe. It was not easy. There were days when the weight threatened to crush her, when every decision seemed to breed only more problems. There were riots, accusations of favoritism, whispered threats in the night. But each time, Tyrion was there, sometimes with a clever word, sometimes with a hard truth. He challenged her when she was wrong, defended her when she was right, never flinching from the consequences of either. Together, they built something fragile, something new. A council of lords and commons, chosen by lot and by merit, to advise the crown. A system of justice that punished the guilty, but forgave those who truly repented. Schools for the children of the poor, apprenticeships for those who had lost everything. There were setbacks, always setbacks. Plots uncovered, grain stolen, rival lords whispering rebellion. Yet for every fire, there was a hand to help put it out. A word to soothe, a plan to rebuild. At night, when the castle was quiet and the city slept, Daenerys would walk the halls, her footsteps echoing on stone. Sometimes she found Tyrion in the library, reading by candlelight, or at the windows watching the stars. You're as restless as your dragons, he told her once. I am not a dragon, she replied. He studied her, eyes keen. No, but you are the fire that keeps the darkness at bay. Nin. She thought of all she had lost, her brothers, her husband, her children of smoke and flame. She thought of all she had gained, a city that might one day forgive her, a people who might one day love her, a friend who would never let her fall. She smiled, and in that moment, it was enough. Eika. The bells of King's Landing tolled, deep and sonorous, marking the passage of days and seasons, as if to insist that time itself would flow, no matter how raw or uncertain the future. To the ears of the city's survivors, that sound was a strange comfort, a reminder that life, in some small way, endured. Daenerys came to know the city not as conqueror, nor savior, but as a woman learning the shape of wounds that did not easily close. Each day dawned with new trouble, new hope, and the ceaseless churn of need. It was Tyrion who mapped the rhythm of the city's renewal. He made a habit of rising before the sun, pulling on a battered coat, and crossing the courtyards with Sir Davos, walking the streets as any merchant or craftsman might. They listened, watched, and counted. Always counting. The coin in the city's vaults, the sacks of flour from Gulltown, the complaints and prayers of the people. Tyrion's ledger grew thick with notes. Candles for the septs, stones for the masons, the price of olive oil and tallow. He held it all in his mind and in his heart, each number a thread in the tapestry he and Daenerys wove together. One morning, as the mist lifted from the Blackwater, Tyrion and Davos found themselves in a district still blackened by fire, the charred bones of tenements standing stark against the sky. Children darted through the rubble, hair wild, eyes bright with the hunger of those who knew hunger too well. Mothers huddled at makeshift cook fires, their faces drawn, hands scarred and busy. The men worked with whatever tools they could find, shifting stones, fashioning crude scaffolds, while city guards, Sun's gold cloaks, now in simple blue tabards, washed and sometimes joined the labor. Tyrion stopped to speak with one of the women, a narrow-faced seamstress whose fingers were stained with soot. She did not smile, but neither did she look away. "What is it you need most?" he asked her, and her answer was not coin, nor bread, but thread, strong thread, to mend what she could salvage and make new clothes for her neighbor's children. When he told Daenerys of this, she summoned the city's merchants and crafters to the great hall. They came, some wary, some bold, and stood together beneath the open windows, their breath clouding in the morning air. Daenerys stood not above them, but among them, her hair plaited simply, her gown marked by ash from the walk she'd taken through the burned streets before dawn. "We have lost much," she told them, "but together, we can build again. I will grant you space in the old market hall, and coin for every bolt of cloth, every loaf of bread, every barrel of nails and salt and lamp oil you bring to those who need it. There will be no taxes for 3 moons. Only a promise: help your city, and you help yourselves." The proposal was simple, but the effect profound. That day, the city's market filled with traders, tailors, bakers, smiths, all calling out their goods. The sound of haggling, of laughter, of children singing as they carried baskets of bread or bolts of linen. It filled the streets, pushed back against the silence and grief that had weighed so heavy. Tyrion watched from a distance, leaning on his cane, and for the first time in many days allowed himself a sip of wine in quiet celebration. Yet peace was never absolute. That very night, Tyrion met with Sir Davos in a candlelit alcove above the yard where Unsullied trained by torchlight. The old smuggler's face was grave, his mouth drawn in a thin line. "There's talk in the taverns," Davos said quietly. "Some say you're growing too close to the Queen. Others say you're not close enough." Tyrion's brows lifted. "Meaning?" "Meaning the lords and ladies who come from the Reach and the Riverlands, they're watching. Some think Daenerys will marry. Some want to be sure she won't. There are whispers that the city needs a king, or at least a consort to keep the peace." Tyrion considered this, lips pursed, fingers tapping his cup. "Shall not be ruled. And I, for one, am grateful." "Nan." "Still," Davos said, "it might be wise to speak with her of alliances. The people trust her more each day, but the lords want assurance. The dragons frighten them, but so does the unknown." Tyrion nodded slowly. "I will speak with her." That night he found Daenerys in her solar, standing before a table scattered with maps and missives. The glow of lanterns shimmered in her silver hair, made her eyes seem darker, deeper. She spoke before he could. "I know what you wish to ask. The answer is not simple." He leaned against the door, folding his arms. "You will not be pressed, Your Grace. Not by me, but the realm will press you, and soon." She traced a finger along the spine of a letter. "Westeros loves to wed its queens, but I will not trade myself like chattel to appease men who would see me chained. If I wed, it will be by my own will." Tyrion smiled wryly. "You have no shortage of suitors." She met his gaze. "Would you have me choose among them?" He shrugged. "It is your choice to make. But you must make it in time, and with care. I have seen what comes of a crown without an heir." "Oh." Daenerys looked out the window, where Drogon's shadow passed, enormous and silent, across the moonlit gardens. "I think often of what my brother would say, of what my father would have done." Tyrion's voice softened. "Your father would have burned them all. You have not. That is the difference, and it is everything." She turned to him, her face lit with resolve. "I will not be a mother only to dragons. I will be a mother to this city, to its people. Let the lords and ladies wait. Let them see what we build first." Tyrion bowed. "As you wish, Your Grace." Spring deepened. New leaves unfurled along the city's ancient oaks and elms. The river ran full and clear, carrying barges loaded with timber, stone, and salted fish from upriver. The market halls thrived, and new workshops opened in the shadow of the Red Keep. Bakers rose before dawn, filling the air with the scent of fresh bread, while children played in the squares, chasing each other beneath banners stitched anew by the seamstresses of Flea Bottom. Yet not all was tranquil. Word came from the reach of lords who muttered against Targaryen rule, of would-be usurpers who counted their swords in secret. The Iron Bank pressed for payment, reminding Daenerys in cold, courteous letters that a crown in debt is a crown at risk. In Dorne, tempers flared between houses that had sworn fealty and those who had lost kin to Dragonfire. Old wounds festered beneath the surface, unseen but not forgotten. One afternoon, Daenerys held council with her hand and her closest advisors. The wind swept through the council chamber, rustling the pages of ledgers and the banners above. Sir Davos reported on the state of the city's defenses. The new master of coin spoke of debt and trade. Grey Worm described the progress of the Unsullied and their uneasy truce with the city's guards. When the talk turned to threats from the west, Daenerys listened intently. Tyrion outlined the risk, his voice calm but urgent. Lord Redwine has not sailed his fleet against us, but he gathers ships at Old Town. There is talk of a new alliance, a marriage between his daughter and the heir to Casterly Rock, to unite the Reach and the Westerlands. If they move, it will be at the first sign of weakness. Man and know her. Daenerys nodded. Then we will show them strength, but not cruelty. Let them see a queen who rules by justice, not by fear. Tyrion met her gaze. Then it is time to send envoys, not with threats, but with gifts. Let us remind the lords of the bounty this city offers. Let them see that trade flows freely, that peace brings profit. Davos added, and let us offer clemency to those who bend the knee. There is power in forgiveness. Daenerys' smile was small but true. Send ships with grain to the Reach, wine and silver to the Westerlands. Remind them that we are not their enemy, unless they make us so. Nay, it was a gamble. For days, the city waited. Barges slipped out at dawn, banners flying, hulls laden with gifts and envoys. The tension was a living thing, coiling in the air as rumor spread. Some expected betrayal, others prophesied blood. But word came back, slow at first, then swelling. The lords of the Reach sent thanks, and with their thanks, envoys of their own. The merchants of Old Town opened their docks, and the price of wheat fell in the city markets. Casterly Rock sent a letter sealed with golden wax, promising friendship if the queen would meet in council and speak of peace. Daenerys received them all. She greeted envoys with warmth, listened to their tales of loss, and offered not just coin but partnership. Tyrion stood at her side, translating the language of power into the language of hope. He bartered, bargained, and sometimes threatened, but always with a wit that left his adversaries smiling even as they conceded ground. The city began to believe, not just in Daenerys, but in itself. The bells tolled not only for deaths and victories, but for marriages, for children born, for the return of spring. One evening, Daenerys walked the halls of the keep, her steps slow, her thoughts troubled. She found Tyrion on the battlements, staring into the darkness, his wine untouched. "Cannot sleep?" she asked, settling beside him. He shook his head. "I used to think victory was a matter of sharp wits and sharper swords. But the peace we are making here, it is slow and fragile." Daenerys leaned on the cold stone. "Fire can burn away the dead wood, but it cannot plant new seeds. That takes time." Memoriam. He regarded her, searching for the shadow of madness he had once feared, and found instead a quiet steel. "You are not the queen I once imagined, but you are the queen we need." She smiled, weary but grateful. "And you are the hand I needed, Tyrion Lannister. I could not have done this without you." He bowed his head, accepting the rare praise with humility. In the days that followed, they worked together more closely still. Tyrion devised a council of tradesmen and women to advise the crown on matters of trade and craft. Daenerys approved the formation of a new city watch, loyal to neither gold nor dragon, but sworn to the people. Grey Worm oversaw their training, and for the first time, the streets of King's Landing knew the peace of honest law. Slowly, the Red Keep became a palace not of fear, but of purpose. There were feasts, modest and merry, where bakers sat beside soldiers, and children recited verses for the queen. The old gods and the new were honored in turn, and the septs opened their doors to the wounded and the orphaned alike. Daenerys grew in wisdom and patience. She listened to her counsel, even when their words stung. She visited the sick, the old, and the mad, offering hope where once there had been only terror. She laughed with children, debated with lords, and knelt in silent prayer for the dead she could not bring back. One afternoon, a great crowd gathered in the square before the Red Keep. The queen was to speak. Tyrion watched from the steps, feeling the pulse of the city, the fear, the hunger, the hope. Daenerys stood before her people, not above them, and spoke with a voice that was clear, true, and full of promise. "We have come through fire and sorrow," she said, "but we are not ashes. We are seeds, and this city is our garden. Let each of you be the gardener who tends it. Help one another. Forgive what can be forgiven. Demand justice. But remember mercy. The realm will be rebuilt not by dragons nor swords, but by the hands and hearts of its people." The cheers that followed were not thunderous, but they were real, grown from pain and gratitude, from belief that this time, perhaps, things would be different. Afterward, in the quiet of her solar, Daenerys sat with Tyrion, sipping wine and reading letters by candlelight. He raised his cup. To the mother of renewal. She laughed, low and warm. "To the hand who gives me counsel I do not always wish to hear." Tyrion's smile was sly. "That is the duty of a hand, your grace, to speak truth, especially when it chafes." They drank together, companions in the slow, uncertain work of peace. And outside, in the streets of a city that had survived fire and madness, the bells tolled for hope and for the dawn. Back home, unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941 14,074 42 719 lakhs. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941 04 284. ITO 17732. Bayan. Kadeniko. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941 A7 1050 A6710 Bayan. Na. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941 Anand B9 ED to 9. 1487 to Bain. Okay. Gindu Sedai. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941 ATCB 1770 Pine. K. Pai Kinyar. Beneath a sky mottled with clouds and the distant shape of Drogon gliding like a living shadow, the city pulsed with new rhythms. Stone by stone, block by block, the scorched and battered streets of King's Landing yielded to the will of a queen who would not let despair take root. The old was never truly gone. One could not look upon the blackened hulk of what had been the Sept of Baelor, nor walk the ruins near the dragon pit without remembering screams. But the new pressed forward in bright banners, in the rattle of wagon wheels, in the dust and noise of rebuilding. Word of Daenerys' governance spread further than her armies had marched. In Old Town, archmaesters debated her edicts over cups of wine. In White Harbor, the Manderleys spoke of the grain that arrived unbidden at their dock, stamped with the three-headed dragon of Targaryen mercy. In the Vale and the Westerlands, lords grew restless, uncertain whether to approach the Dragon Queen as rivals, allies, or potential victims. But gold flowed, and so did letters. Long, circuitous treatises on loyalty, trade, and forgiveness. Each morning, Tyrion joined Daenerys in the council chamber. He came not as a lion of Casterly Rock, but as a survivor, one whose sharpest weapon was now his tongue. His wit was legend, his wine cup never quite empty, though of late he drank less. Every detail, market prices, reports from the Reach, the names and moods of lords and tradesmen, found its way into his ledger. It was a morning like any other when a raven arrived from the north, bearing the seal of Lady Sansa Stark. Its words were cool but not unkind, offering congratulations and cautious hope for peace. Sansa spoke of the need for trade: wool, fish, silver from the mines near the wall, medicines from the citadel. She spoke too of scars that would not fade. "We in the north remember," she wrote, "but we do not hate. The snows melt and the grass returns. So may it be for you, Queen Daenerys, if you would have it." Netsoiren. Daenerys read the letter in silence and then set it down. "She does not trust me. But she does not close the door." Tyrion nodded. "That is as much as you could hope, for now. Offer her more than she asks. The North has known only hardship these last years. A gesture of good faith could yield tenfold in loyalty later." She thought on this, chin in hand. "Send ships to White Harbor. Grain, salt, timber, and gifts for Lady Sansa. Something from the south. Something rare. Peaches, perhaps, or the blue glass from Lys. Daenerys." Tyrion grinned, picturing Sansa's reserved smile, the careful calculation behind her eyes. "And a letter, written by your own hand, not from a queen to a subject, but from a queen to a sister in hardship." Daenerys found parchment and wrote. The words came slowly, but honestly. When she finished, Tyrion read the letter and nodded. "It will do. It is not just policy that wins hearts. It is small courtesies remembered." Outside, the city hummed. Teams of unsullied volunteers cleared old rubble, making way for gardens in the poorer districts. Markets now stood where battlefields had been, each stall a monument to stubbornness and hope. Tyrion pressed the council to create a fund for war orphans, coins for guardians, lessons for the children, apprenticeships for the clever and the lost. One boy, a sharp-tongued lad with hair as dark as coal, was brought to the Red Keep for stealing bread. Rather than punishment, Daenerys ordered he serve as page in her court, under the watchful eye of Sir Davos, who taught him not only to read and write, but to mend nets and spot the weather. In time, the boy became a favorite, a shadow always at her heels, mimicking Tyrion's mannerisms and quoting his quips. At the council table, the work of rebuilding sometimes felt endless. A new guild of stonemasons vied for contracts with the older, storied families. The fishmongers of the Blackwater quarreled with the bakers of Flea Bottom over stall space and tariffs. Always, the shadow of war hung near, as lords beyond the walls gauged their strength and wondered if the Queen's fire might one day burn them as well. It was in this atmosphere that a visitor arrived at the city gates. Asha Greyjoy, known now as Lady of the Iron Islands. Her banner, black and gold, flew alongside the dragons. She rode through the gates in broad daylight, her long hair bound in salt-stiff braids, her eyes sharp as the edge of a storm. Behind her marched a train of Ironborn, bearing chests of silver and barrels of fish, a peace offering and a dare. The small council received her in the great hall, where she stood before Daenerys and inclined her head, never quite bowing, but not defiant either. "I bring gifts from the sea," she announced, "and an offer. The Iron Islands will pay their debts and pledge peace if the Queen will allow us to rule our own." Daenerys listened, her face unreadable. "The Ironborn have always craved freedom. Will you promise me peace, Lady Greyjoy? No raids, no burning, no reaving?" Asha met her gaze. "So long as you treat us as equals, not subjects." There was silence, filled only by the distant caw of crows. Tyrion leaned in. "The Iron Islands are not what they were, Your Grace. Their ships can be a shield or a threat. It costs little to allow them their customs, so long as their swords stay sheathed." "No." Daenerys studied Asha, weighing the offer. She thought of old tales, of Balon Greyjoy's folly, of Theon's fate. She thought of alliances made in blood, and how often they turned to ash. But the Iron Islands needed peace, and so did she. "So be it," Daenerys said at last. "You will rule your islands and pay your debts, but you will send ships to protect our coasts, and men to serve in my navy. And you will answer to my summons in time of need." Asha grinned, fierce and wild. "Done. May the seas be calm between us, Your Grace." Niwau. A treaty was struck that night, sealed with wine and laughter in the council chamber. Tyrion raised his cup in toast. Davos offered salt and bread, and even Grey Worm's stern face softened, just a little, as the Ironborn drank deep and spoke of storms survived. The word spread quickly. Daenerys the peacemaker. Daenerys who forged alliances, not just with dragons and swords, but with outcasts and rivals. The Iron Islands sent ships to patrol the coast, and for the first time in living memory, Westeros saw fleets flying both kraken and dragon banners, working in uneasy harmony. But all peace is fragile. In the months that followed, trouble simmered at the city's edge. Some lords of the Crownlands, angry at the Queen's generosity to pirates and wolves, plotted in shadows, sending secret letters to Old Town and Casterly Rock. There was a grain riot in the market, swiftly ended by the new city watch. Fair but firm, their loyalty now to justice rather than bribes. The gold cloaks of old were gone, but not forgotten. Their leaders whispered of revenge, biding time in cellars and smoky taverns. One such plot was discovered on a rain-soaked night when the Queen herself was returning from a visit to the city's northern gate. A knife flashed in the darkness. A hired blade, his accent low-born, his courage fueled by desperation. It was not Daenerys who saw him first, but Tyrion, who threw himself between Queen and assassin, toppling the man with a shout. Grey Worm and his men closed in an instant, and the would-be killer was taken alive. That night, in the council chamber, Daenerys faced the prisoner. His story was a common one: anger at the ruin of his home, at the loss of kin, at a new world in which men like him seemed to have no place. She listened, her face shadowed by candlelight, and then did what few expected. "Let him live," she commanded. "Let him serve in the city watch, under the eyes of Grey Worm. Let him learn there's a better way than hate. Let she know." Tyrion, his hands still aching from the scuffle, said nothing. But in his eyes was respect, a recognition that true rule came not from fear, but from the strength to forgive. The assassin was set to work, and word of the Queen's mercy spread like wildfire. Some called her weak, others called her wise. The city watched, uncertain, but hope grew. Tyrion's counsel deepened. He drafted new laws, balancing justice with clemency. Davos organized more food runs, apprenticeships, trade with the Vale. Grey Worm reformed the city watch, rooting out old corruption, giving posts to men and women from every quarter. By summer's height, King's Landing felt transformed. Where grass would not grow, wildflowers took root. The market squares bustled with new voices. Dothraki traders selling spices, Dornish vintners hawking wine, northern crafters with wool and steel. In the alleys and gardens, children played at dragons and lions, their laughter a promise of what might be possible. Daenerys, for the first time since her arrival, allowed herself moments of rest. She took counsel with Tyrion in the castle gardens, walking among the roses, letting the scent and color soothe old wounds. They spoke of peace, of power, of the way of mercy, and the price of command. "Do you ever wish you could leave it all?" she asked him one evening, her eyes on the city below. Tyrion sipped his wine. "Often. But who would I be if I ran from the work we have begun? There are worse things than duty, Your Grace, and fewer joys greater than seeing hope rekindled." She smiled, tracing the rim of her goblet. "When I first came to Westeros, I thought I would conquer, burn, take what was owed me. I did not understand what it meant to rule. I did not see the pain beneath the crowns. You see it now," Tyrion said, "and that is why they will follow you." A letter arrived then, brought by Raven from the Eyrie. It bore the sigil of House Arryn and a simple message. The Vale would send food and gold so long as the Queen's peace endured. In the west, the Lannister bannermen met at Lannisport, debating whether to submit or rebel. But Tyrion's letters, personal, clever, always respectful, sowed just enough doubt to stay their hands. One afternoon the Queen called a great assembly in the Dragon Pit. Lords and ladies came from every corner, some proud, some fearful, some merely curious. Tyrion presided, voice echoing beneath the high, broken vaults. He read out new laws, abolishing cruel taxes, opening guilds to commoners, swearing equal justice for all. Daenerys rose then, her silver hair unbound, her cloak a simple weave of Targaryen red and black. She spoke of dreams, of unity, of a kingdom where all could live in peace, not because they must, but because they wished to. The lords listened. Some grumbled, some wept, but all heard her, and in that moment, something shifted. Afterward, Tyrion found himself alone on the battlements, watching the river catch the gold of sunset. Daenerys joined him, silent for a time. "Did we do enough?" she asked. He looked at her, his eyes lined with the wisdom of so much pain. "It is never enough, but it is more than most could have hoped." "Nan." She turned to him, fierce and gentle. "Stay with me, Tyrion. We are not done yet." He bowed, smiling. "I am yours, your grace, until the end." And in the heart of the realm, as bells tolled and banners snapped in the dusk, a new chapter began. One not written in blood, but in the slow, stubborn ink of peace. "Ah, Paini. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941 BTS. SB 8970 SJC. End." Night carried a gentler hush than in the days before, when the city trembled at every flicker of torchlight, and the dark seemed haunted by dragons' wings. On evenings now, windows shone with steady candlelight. The laughter of children sometimes drifted from open courtyards, blending with the songs of sailors returning up the Blackwater from distant ports. The Red Keep itself breathed more easily. Guards wore the new livery of the Queen, a dragon not rampant but poised, wings open in shelter. On moonless nights, the glow from within was soft and constant, a sign that no shadow would go unseen. In the council chambers, Tyrion lingered long after the others had left, fingers smudged with ink, poring over petitions and tallies. The city's pulse was there in his ledgers. Grain and debts, quarrels and marriages, wine shipments, births and burials. He read them like a prophet parsing omens. His mind worked even as his body wearied, the past months showing in the deeper lines about his eyes. Tonight, Daenerys came to him in quiet, without retinue, her feet bare on the rush mats, hair loose around her shoulders. The city's burden was in her carriage, but her face, when she spoke, was open, unguarded. "You should sleep," she said, settling into the seat beside him. "Even a hand is allowed his dreams." Tyrion gave a wry smile. "My dreams are usually trouble, your grace. Numbers are easier, more obedient. But you, perhaps, could command even those." She studied the ledger, then the dark river of the city beyond the window. "Does it ever get easier, Tyrion? The knowing, the deciding?" "Not now." He shook his head. "It becomes more familiar, perhaps, but never lighter. Every day we mend a little, only for some new fracture to appear." She let out a slow breath. "I fear the fractures inside me will never mend." He regarded her, gentle. "That is what lets you see the wounds in others, your grace. I would trust no queen who felt herself whole." A companionable silence fell. Daenerys traced a pattern in spilled ink, the silver in her hair catching the lamplight. "They speak of you among the people. Some call you the Queen's heart. Others, the clever shadow behind her words. Nemdor." "And what do you call me?" Tyrion asked. She smiled. "My friend." That word, simple, honest, settled between them like a benediction. Tyrion closed his ledger at last. "Shall we walk, your grace? Let us see what our work has wrought." They left the council chamber, descending through the keep's winding halls. Unsullied guards stepped aside without a word. The gardens, reclaimed from bramble and scorched earth, were lush with midsummer growth. Orange trees bore fruit, and the air was heavy with the scent of jasmine and wild mint. A fountain, restored by stone masons from the reach, played in the moonlight, its music gentle as a lullaby. Daenerys walked with bare feet through the dew, her hand trailing over the stone basin. "I remember no such gardens in Marine, nor in the shadow of Pentos. Only sand and the taste of salt. Now, here, it feels as if even I might take root." Tyrion watched her, knowing that the roots she grew were not only in soil, but in hearts, in memories, in the stories that would outlive them both. As they strolled, a soft voice called from the far side of the garden. It was the boy, Edric, once a thief. now page and student of Sir Davos. He carried a battered lute and paused when he saw the queen. She beckoned him forward. "Play for us, Edric," she said. The boy hesitated, then began a song, one of the old Dornish ballads, sweet and sad. Tyrion and Daenerys sat side by side on the marble bench, letting the music fill the night. When the last notes faded, she thanked him and pressed a coin into his hand, a gesture as regal as any proclamation. "Sleep well, Edric," Tyrion said. The boy grinned, vanishing into the halls with his tune on his lips. Daenerys leaned back, gaze on the stars. "Would you have believed, Tyrion, that we might come to such peace as this?" "Peace is a clever liar," he said. "It always slips through the fingers when one grows careless. But tonight, I believe." A soft breeze shifted the trees. Somewhere, distant, Drogon roared, less threat than greeting, a reminder of old powers now at rest. In the days that followed, peace demanded its price. Rumors reached the city of a bandit lord harrying the road south to Duskendale. Tyrion, after conferring with Grey Worm and Sir Davos, recommended a response swift but measured. A combined force of Unsullied and City Watch, led by Davos himself, with instructions to offer amnesty to the brigands if they would lay down arms and take up honest labor. It was not blood the queen wanted, but loyalty. Daenerys sent letters to every holdfast between the city and the sea, promising safety, grain, and fair judgment. When Davos returned weeks later, the bandits' leader at his side, Daenerys greeted both as equals. The former outlaw, Elias, weathered and sharp-eyed, knelt in the throne room not out of fear, but gratitude. "My family starved," he said. "My lord was dead, my farm burned. You offered mercy when you could have sent only fire." She raised him. "Let your hands mend what you once broke. The city needs builders, not ghosts." Her willingness to forgive, to bind old wounds, spread faster than threat ever had. Other bandits melted back into villages. Old feuds softened at the edges. The city's new watch, drawn from all classes and corners, patrolled the streets in pairs. One seasoned guard, one recruit, so that trust grew with every shift. Children born in the spring now toddled in the market squares. The first marriages under the new laws were celebrated with laughter and song. In council, the queen's circle expanded. She drew in voices often ignored. A septa from the ruined sept. A smith with hands like hammers. The leader of the fishmongers' guild. A young woman from Dorne whose mother had died in the fire but whose resolve had not. Tyrion presided with wry humor, quelling disputes before they grew too loud. Davos handled logistics. Grey Worm oversaw discipline, and Daenerys listened, weighing every plea. One day, Sansa Stark herself arrived from Winterfell, white wolf banner snapping beside the Targaryen dragon. She came in dignity, not submission, and Daenerys welcomed her as an equal. They walked the walls together, looking over the city and the endless green beyond. "The north is not easily moved," Sansa said, "but we see the change here. You rule with more than fire now." Daenerys smiled. "I had to learn. The cost was high." "And so?" Sansa's eyes softened. "It is always high. My father believed a ruler must be loved or feared. I see now one must be understood." They spoke long into the night, sharing stories of hardship, hope, and the lessons of old wounds. When Sansa departed, she left behind not only the promise of trade, but a secret letter, a pact of mutual defense, should old enemies rise again. That enemy stirred sooner than any wished. Word reached the city of a new conspiracy. Bannermen of the Westerlands, emboldened by rumors of Lannister gold, plotting rebellion from the safety of Casterly Rock. Daenerys called council at dawn. Tyrion's face was grave, for though he bore no love for his family's ambitions, he knew the lengths to which they might go. "We must show unity," he said, "not only in the city, but across the realm. If we seem divided, they will strike." Daenerys agreed. Messengers rode at once to the Vale, to Dorne, to White Harbor, each carrying word of the Queen's justice, and warning that treachery would find no quarter. Ships patrolled the western coast, Ironborn and Reachmen working side by side. Gold was sent to loyal lords, trade privileges extended to those who pledged fealty. Yet Daenerys knew that armies and coin would not be enough. She rode out herself, first to Tumbleton, then to Fair Isle, meeting with small folk and lords alike. She listened to grievances, spoke of peace and prosperity, knelt with weeping mothers in ruined halls. Her presence calmed, inspired, and disarmed. The rebellion sputtered. A handful of bannermen were captured. Others, seeing the realm united, sued for peace. Casterly Rock itself sent envoys, offering not only gold, but the keys to its gates in exchange for mercy. Daenerys accepted, publicly forgiving those who repented, punishing only those whose crimes were too dark to excuse. Tyrion traveled to the Rock, standing once more in the halls of his childhood. The castle felt smaller, older, the gold less bright. He oversaw the surrender, ensuring old rivalries would not burst anew. When he returned to King's Landing, it was as a Lannister in service of peace, not pride. Autumn approached, bringing with it the smell of wood smoke and the promise of harvest. The city's first festival since the war was planned, a week of feasts, dancing, and games. Daenerys rode at the head of the parade, not in a carriage, but on foot, children flanking her, musicians playing songs new and old. Tyrion orchestrated the revels, slyly making sure each district felt included. Davos judged the contests, Grey Worm watched with a wary but pleased eye. The night of the final feast, the hall was bright with lanterns. Lords and commons dined together. Daenerys sat at the center, Tyrion at her right, Davos at her left, Sansa and Asha Greyjoy across the table. Wine flowed, and laughter. And when Edric and his fellow pages performed a bawdy song of dragons and wolves, the whole hall shook with delighted mirth. Later, as the last candles flickered, Daenerys and Tyrion found themselves once more in the garden, looking out over the sleeping city. "We are not done," Daenerys said softly. "There will be new storms." Tyrion nodded. "Storms will come, but so will spring. That is the lesson of this city." She turned to him, gratitude bright in her eyes. "Stay with me, Tyrion. There is no realm without your counsel." He took her hand, bowing his head. "I am yours, your grace, for as long as I am able." And as the first chill of winter crept through the gardens, the heart of King's Landing burned with a new fire, not of destruction, but of hope that endured, unbowed and unbroken, in the darkness and the dawn. Mondiansh. By the time winter's first breath slid along the black water, the city bore scars but also new beauty, subtle and defiant, a stubborn wildflower in a field of ash. Daenerys had made a home, not just for herself, but for those whose lives the old world would have left behind. She stood one morning at the edge of the highest garden, looking down at rooftops, shingled with new red tiles, the shapes of market stalls, the glint of sails upon the river, the domes of sept and temple restored in careful layers. Her heart was restless. Peace was not an absence of trouble, but a living thing, delicate, always hungry. The city's wounds had healed over with callous. But in the back streets, whispers still curled like smoke. Every kindness the queen dispensed was weighed, every mercy judged as softness by some and silent strength by others. The lords of Westeros sent more envoys now than armies, but every promise they made was balanced by an unspoken threat. Tyrion knew this well and managed each letter with a diplomat's care, the flick of his quill as sharp as the blade he never wore. Today, the council chamber was filled with the low, steady hum of debate. Grey Worm reported that river pirates had struck 2 merchant barges, slipping away into the fog before the city watch or Ironborn could respond. Davos proposed a new system of signal towers along the river, manned by loyal men from the fishing villages, their families kept safe within the city's walls as guarantee. Tyrion pressed for an alliance with the Guild of River Pilots, offering them a royal charter in exchange for eyes and ears upriver. Daenerys listened to each, weighing not only the words but the motives beneath. She turned to the Master of Whisperers, a sharp-faced woman from Lys who had come to the city in the first waves of refugees, now trusted for her discretion. "Are these pirates merely hungry?" Daenerys asked. "Or are they the vanguard of some greater mischief?" The woman's accent was soft, but her words hard as ice. "A few are desperate men, your grace. A few take coin from Old Town, a few from Casterly Rock, but most are driven by need, not gold. They will bend, if you offer them a better life. Turn some into city guards. Give their children a place at the new school. Now, see it done, Daenerys said, nodding to Grey Worm and Davos. I would rather have them at our table than at our throats. Tyrion let out a breath. You have a gift for turning enemies into allies, Your Grace. But for every man we bring in from the dark, 3 more will be watching for weakness. Daenerys' lips curved. Let them watch. The strong need not shout. As the meeting closed, Tyrion lingered, waiting for the room to empty. He watched Daenerys, measuring her in silence. They fear you less now, he said, but not because you are weak. They see the dragon's fire is not the only weapon you carry. She met his eyes, letting him see the weariness behind her composure. I'm tired, Tyrion. Sometimes I wonder if I was meant to be queen, or merely the storm before a gentler dawn. He approached, hands folded, eyes softer than his voice. You are the dawn. The storm is only the cost. When? Outside, the city was alive with preparations for the winter festival, a tradition nearly forgotten, now reborn as a sign that old wounds could be healed by new customs. Market stalls overflowed with salted meats, apples from the Reach, wheels of sharp white cheese from the Vale. Children sang songs in the square, their laughter ringing clear over the clatter of builders repairing a stone bridge collapsed in the last floods. Daenerys insisted that no one in the city go hungry that night. She walked among the fires and feasts in a simple cloak, handing out bread and sweet cakes, pausing to speak to an old woman who blessed her in the name of both the Seven and the Lord of Light, just in case. Tyrion followed, a little behind, exchanging quips with tradesmen, slipping coins to minstrels, listening for the mutterings that might grow into discontent. At the center of the festival stood a tall tree, decorated with ribbons and painted lanterns. When dusk fell, Daenerys placed the first candle at its base, a ritual she invented in memory of all who had been lost. The people followed, candles brightening the square until the dark retreated. As she watched the lights, Daenerys felt a weight lifting, if only for a breath. Tyrion came to stand beside her, the cold reddening his cheeks. Do you think it will last? She asked, voice low. He glanced sideways at her. Nothing lasts. But everything is worth doing just the same. A singer's voice carried over the crowd. Daenerys closed her eyes, letting the music wash over her. There was no peace that would last forever, but there was this moment, and it was hers. With the coming of true winter, the city drew in around itself. Fires burned high in hearths. Grain stores were guarded by men loyal to both queen and hand. The council's work shifted from rebuilding to keeping order. Disputes over coal, shortages of lamp oil, outbreaks of fever in the poorest quarters. Daenerys ordered new clinics opened, the healers supplied with rare herbs from Dorne and the Summer Isles, medicines bought with Lannister gold. The lords of the realm sent gifts and spies in equal measure. Lord Redwine arrived with casks of wine and veiled warnings about trade routes, while Lady Mertens of Mistwood brought a delegation of noble women to petition for seats on the council. Daenerys received them all with the same measured courtesy, never letting them forget that the city was hers, its peace hard-won and fiercely guarded. It was in this season that Jon Snow returned to King's Landing, a rider in black on a shaggy white horse, his direwolf loping silent at his side. He came with little retinue, and Daenerys welcomed him not with trumpets, but with quiet in her solar, Tyrion and Sansa present, Sir Davos at the door. Jon bowed low, but there was no servility in him, only respect. He spoke of the Night's Watch, of wildlings come south to trade, of skirmishes on the far side of the wall. There are still things in the dark that would not see your peace last, Your Grace, he said. But the wall holds, and the North remembers. Sansa smiled at her brother's words, pride mingled with relief. Daenerys offered Jon a seat at council, and he took it only after assurances that his time in the city would not keep him from his duty at the wall. For a few weeks, the halls of the Red Keep rang with old voices, Stark and Targaryen, Lannister and Seaworth, Greyjoy and Tyrell. The city's people whispered of a new age, queens and lords working side by side, banners of rival houses flying above the city's gates. Children played at politics in the alleys, naming each other hand or queen, and once, Daenerys caught a boy with a wooden sword and a wolf mask, leading a parade of smaller children toward the river. demanding a toll and apples from passers-by. It was during this brief peace that the council turned its eyes outward, to the broader realm. The Dornish asked for a road, straight and safe, linking Sunspear to the Reach. The Vale wanted trading posts, rebuilt on the high passes. In the Westerlands, Tyrion's old kin sent word of mines reopened, eager for trade. Gold for grain, copper for Dornish horses. Tyrion managed the letters, never trusting a Lannister word without a dozen witnesses. Daenerys sent envoys, trusted men and women, some low-born, some high, tasked not only with securing trade, but with learning what seeds of rebellion might be stirring. One envoy, a quiet girl from the city's orphanage, returned from Old Town with tales of a conspiracy. A cabal of old maesters, septons, and exiled knights planning to claim the city for the realm, should the queen's reign falter. Tyrion brought the news to Daenerys as she sat with Jon and Sansa before the fire. "It will not end, will it?" she said, her gaze distant. Jon shook his head. "Peace is the gift we give our children, not ourselves." Daenerys nodded, thoughtful. "So we must keep building, not with swords but with trust." And so she did. The City Watch, now drawn from every corner of the realm, uncovered the cabal before it could act. Those willing to confess were pardoned and set to honest work. The rest were sent to distant garrisons or exiled beyond the sea. In the spring, Daenerys called a grand assembly in the Dragon Pit. Every lord, lady, tradesman, and counselor invited to speak. There, beneath the broken dome, she outlined a vision for a council of the realm, chosen by both birth and merit to share in the work of rule. Tyrion drafted the charter, Sansa and Jon offered amendments, and the city scribes spread the word. It was not greeted with cheers. Change never is, but it was accepted. Over time, those who once feared the dragon learned to see in her a queen who sought not vengeance, but belonging. Tyrion watched all this with a blend of pride and sorrow. He saw himself in the smallest changes. The page boys reading by candlelight, the low-born women now seated at council, the laughter in the markets, the new songs sung in smoky taverns. He sat with Daenerys late one evening, overlooking the lights of the city. "You have done what your ancestors could not, Your Grace," he said softly. "You have made this city a home." She smiled, leaning against the cold stone. "Only because I was not alone. You, Davos, Sansa, Jon, none of this is mine alone." Tyrion took her hand, his own weathered and small in hers. "There will always be shadows. But for tonight, the city sleeps in peace." "Nepsia." She nodded, her gaze sweeping over all that they had made. "Let the shadows come. We will meet them together." So the city endured, and hope with it. A fragile, stubborn hope growing with every season, until even the old wounds became part of the story, not the end. And from the highest garden, as dawn came gold and full over the waking roofs, the queen and her hand watched the future unfold, not with fear, but with quiet, unyielding faith. Spring breathed a green haze across the city's ramparts as sunlight seeped through narrow lanes, dappling the cobbles with gold. Shoots of grass sprang between stones once blackened by fire. The great bells tolled at sunrise, an ancient sound. This time, not for death or war, but for the opening of the Queen's Market, the fair of the new season. Old men in the Street of Silk said King's Landing had not been so alive in living memory. A dozen dialects rose in chorus in the bustling squares. The tang of citrus, spiced fish, and roasting chestnuts filled the air. The shadow of the dragon was now a promise, not a threat. The Red Keep had been transformed, though its bones remained the same. The throne room gleamed, its columns freshly painted, the Iron Throne draped in banners. Not only the Targaryen three-headed dragon, but the Wolf of Stark, the Kraken of Greyjoy, the Golden Rose of Tyrell, and the Son of Dorne, each a token of alliance. There was talk in the corridors that this was no longer a queen's court, but the court of the realm itself. Daenerys had not surrendered her rule, but she had opened it. Each day began with the council. Tyrion arrived with the sun, his limp more pronounced after a winter of little rest. his wit sharpened by duty. Grey Worm joined him, scarred but resolute, and Davos, ever the voice of the commons, entered with a sheaf of notes and the city's pulse in his hands. Sansa Stark had stayed, and her presence lent the council an unspoken steel. Asha Greyjoy sent her brother, now free and sober, to represent the Iron Islands. From Dorne, a shrewd, quiet girl named Elia watched and learned. Daenerys presided with a new composure. Her silver hair loose, her voice even, her words patient. She did not command so much as ask, listening, considering, letting silence do half the work. The council debated the harvest, the next winter's granaries, the training of the new guard. Each point argued not with bitterness, but the pride of those determined to be right for the realm's sake, not their own. The wounds of the city were healing, but deeper wounds remained beyond the walls. Tyrion brought reports. In the Riverlands, some lords hoarded grain and plotted for advantage. In the Westerlands, gold flowed, but so did resentment, especially among minor Lannisters who chafed at their cousins' new loyalty to the crown. The North watched warily, their support sure only as long as their interests were met. Daenerys sent envoys and gifts, her missives written in her own hand. Tyrion selected her envoys with care. Honest men and women, chosen for courage as much as cunning. A net of trust spread over the realm, though some knots frayed. When a petty lord in Harrenhal tried to seize land from the crown, the city's new court tried him in the open, with Sansa presiding. He was sent to the wall, and the verdict was seen not as a queen's vengeance but as justice, clean and impartial. Throughout the city, Daenerys walked often in disguise, a cloak hiding her hair, a simple braid in the northern fashion. She went to the wharves at dawn, to the temples at dusk, to the markets and the alleys and the open gardens that had replaced many a burned ruin. Sometimes Tyrion went with her, the two of them sharing jokes and silences as they watched their city breathe. One evening, as dusk purpled the sky, Daenerys sat on the steps of the Great Sept, now rebuilt as a house of learning and charity, open to all faiths, and spoke with a girl selling wildflowers. The girl had lost her father in the siege, her mother to fever, but she survived. She showed Daenerys how to weave daisies and marigolds into a crown. When the queen slipped a coin into the girl's hand, the child looked up, confusion turning to awe. "Don't you want a blessing?" the girl whispered. Daenerys shook her head gently. "No, sweetling. Your flowers are blessing enough." Eddie. She walked back to the castle with the garland in her hand, and for a long time after, she wore no crown but that. Tyrion saw it and laughed. "You'll start a fashion. The lords will be plaiting buttercups in their beards before summer's end." Daenerys pressed the garland into his hand. "It would suit you, but there was always work." One morning, news arrived of a fire in the city's poorest district, set not by accident but by men paid from across the sea. 3 warehouses and 2 bakeries lost. A dozen dead. Fear quickened in the air. Grey Worm moved swiftly, finding and arresting the arsonists. But Daenerys called for more than punishment. She called a meeting in the ruined district itself. She stood amid the rubble with her council, inviting every resident to speak. There, Tyrion listened to a one-legged baker rail against the city guard, to an old woman accuse the council of caring only for lords, to children complain of hunger and cold. Daenerys listened to each. Then she pledged new funds for repairs, apprenticeships for orphan children, and free bread for a month. "The city is a tapestry," she said. "We will not let a single thread be lost." The gesture did more than gold or law. The city rallied. The baker became a leader, organizing his neighbors. The old woman brought petitions to the council. The children found places as pages and apprentices. Tyrion saw how Daenerys' rule was no longer simply decreed. It was shaped by those who lived beneath it. Summer neared. The Riverlands sent barges heavy with grain, and the new guard paraded through the city. Men and women from every region, sworn first to the law, then to the queen. At midsummer, Daenerys declared a festival of peace. Feasts for the poor, games for the children, and a fair where lords and commons mingled without fear. On the festival's final night, lanterns floated down the Blackwater, each bearing the name of a loved one, lost to war or hunger. Daenerys stood on the riverbank with Tyrion, Sansa, and Jon, each of them silent as the flickering lights drifted to sea. "I once thought peace would be an ending," Daenerys said softly. "But it is only ever a beginning." Tyrion nodded. "And the hardest work of all." Later, as the festival faded, trouble rose from the east. A fleet from the free cities threatened the narrow sea, claiming debts unpaid since the war. Tyrion and Davos convened with the city's new admirals, the Ironborn, the Reachmen, even a pair of Pentoshi merchants who had cast their lot with the dragon. Daenerys sent envoys to treat, but prepared her navy, her mind sharp with old lessons. "I will not trade peace for cowardice," she said, her eyes fierce as ever. "If they come for us, they will find a city ready." The fleets never landed. A show of force, a clever letter, a well-placed bribe, and some whispered, a threat from Drogon himself, kept the peace. The city watched and waited, but nothing came. Grain prices steadied and trade resumed. Time passed, marked not by war or fire, but by seasons and festivals and the slow mending of trust. The first children born after the peace learned to walk in streets unbroken by soldiers' boots. They played at queens and council, at hand and captain and healer, their laughter echoing in gardens where bones once lay. At council, Tyrion's hair grew white, Davos' gait slowed, Sansa's voice grew deeper and stronger, and Daenerys, who had outlived fire, storm, and heartbreak, remained a steady light, her wisdom weathered and bright. The council welcomed new faces. Elia of Dorne, now master of ships. The baker's daughter, apprenticed to the master of coin. A crippled boy, grown into a clever scribe. One day, Daenerys gathered her council in the garden where wildflowers still grew. She spoke of the future, a council of the realm, chosen by the people and the lords alike. A peace not dependent on her life, but on the law they had forged together. "It is not mine to hold forever," she said. "Let us build something that will last, even when we are all gone." They argued, they planned, and at last they agreed. The first assembly was held in the dragon pit, banners flying, people crowding every tier. Daenerys stood not on a dais but among them, and the council was chosen. Some high-born, some low, each given voice by the city itself. Tyrion stood beside her as the bells rang. He looked at the crowd, the city, the queen crowned with wildflowers. "You have done it," he said. "We have done it," she replied, and the city roared with hope. That night, Daenerys walked the walls, looking out at the city and the sea. Tyrion joined her, leaning on the parapet, silent a long while. "At last," he said, "I see a peace that does not end in fire." She smiled, a little tired, but full of pride. "We have planted something, Tyrion. May it grow beyond us both." Below, in the streets and squares, lanterns flickered, and laughter rose with the wind. And in the Red Keep, in the city, in the hearts of the people, hope endured, living, breathing, stubborn as spring, lasting long after the last dragon's shadow faded from the stones. "Gay, Ka. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941 B Catherine Ning, and 70 Fords. 715 Vine, Ein Jai. 1 To." The soft hush of morning swept over King's Landing with the promise of another new day. In the Queen's Market, peddlers set up their carts and stallkeepers swept the flagstones, scattering breadcrumbs for the pigeons as dawn painted the sky in hues of rose and saffron. Women sang as they unloaded baskets of herbs and bread, and men called out the price of salted fish, their voices ringing through the city's arteries. Far above, in the Red Keep, Daenerys Targaryen watched from her solar balcony as the city wakened and bloomed. She felt every pulse of it, the slow thrum of labor and laughter and the never-ending business of survival. She listened to the bells and the cries of hawkers, the clatter of horses on stone, and the laughter of children tumbling through patches of wildflowers that grew where walls had fallen. Sometimes, she wondered if this city remembered the sound of dragonfire, if, beneath every new cobble and green shoot, the earth still whispered of ashes. Yet, when she looked upon the people, busy, defiant, alive. She was reminded that what lived and grew was always stronger than what burned. The council gathered in the solar just after the first meal. Tyrion arrived early, leaning on his cane, nodding to the queen with a wry smile and dark eyes that missed nothing. Davos followed, clutching a parchment from the docks. Sansa entered, her red hair unbound, her manner calm but alert. Grey Worm stood silent by the door, always vigilant, and young Elia of Dorne, now master of ships, brought news from the narrow sea. Daenerys presided with the grace of hard-won confidence, inviting each voice in turn. They debated tariffs for northern wool, the construction of a new bridge across the Blackwater, and a proposal for a city school to be built in the shadow of the Red Keep. Tyrion argued for the school, his voice sharp, his wit gentle. Sansa lent her support, telling a story of the orphan girl who had learned to read in the Queen's library. There was trouble, as ever. A message from Old Town warned of a plague in the western countryside. Davos suggested sending healers and stores of dried fruit, and Daenerys agreed, drafting the letter herself and sealing it with her signet. Elia raised the specter of pirates from Tyrosh, but the city's navy, Ironborn, Reachmen, and Dornish, had kept the harbors safe. All of these matters passed like tides, ebbing and flowing. But the greatest concern was always the question of peace. How to keep it, how to root it so deep that no wind or war could tear it loose. After the council, Daenerys walked the castle gardens. Spring roses spilled over the low walls. Citrus trees dropped yellow fruit onto the path. She found Tyrion on a bench beneath a flowering cherry, reading a letter from the north. He looked up, blinking in the sunlight. "It is from Lady Lyanna Mormont," he said, waving the parchment. "She requests additional steel for the Bear Island armory and sends you her admiration, though she still insists the North will never kneel." Daenerys laughed, feeling some of her cares slip away. "Then let us give her what she needs. The North is proud, but I would rather have Lady Lyanna as a friend than an enemy." "Nessunor." Tyrion nodded, folding the letter. "You have learned much, Your Grace. The coin spent on gifts and kindness often buys more loyalty than 1,000 swords." She sat beside him, letting the silence settle between them. In the garden's heart, children ran through the grass, noble and lowborn, city and country, mingling freely in a way unthinkable in the old court. "Do you ever miss it?" Daenerys asked, her eyes on the city below. "The struggle, the certainty of war." Tyrion thought for a moment. "Not war, but I do miss the clarity of it. Peace is muddier. Every kindness sows a new quarrel. Every victory hides a cost. But I think I prefer it, mud and all. Not a rocks." Daenerys smiled. "As do I." They sat together, watching the petals fall, until the bells called her back to duty. The week spun on. A delegation from the Westerlands arrived, bearing gifts and veiled questions. Tyrion met with his kin in a sunlit hall, old wounds flickering in his gaze, but his words careful and courteous. Daenerys joined them for the feast, listening to Lord Martin Lannister boast of reopened mines and the city's new prosperity. She thanked him with measured words, and after the meal, met him privately in the gardens. "You seek reassurance," she told him, her tone gentle but iron beneath. "You have it. Your gold flows east, your ships are safe, and your bannermen sit on my council. But know this, peace is not the absence of fear, but the presence of justice. There will be no return to old ways." Martin bowed, his pride held in check by the knowledge of what had been lost and won. He returned to Lannisport with gifts and stories, and the whispers in the Westerlands changed. The Dragon Queen was fair, but no less dangerous for her mercy. In the north, Sansa's correspondence grew. She and Daenerys exchanged letters nearly every week. Advice, news, small jokes, and private confidences. Sometimes Daenerys wrote to Jon Snow at the Wall, his messages returning with reports of wildling settlements and the quiet, ongoing vigilance that watched the frozen edge of the world. It was in the midst of these routines that a crisis struck. Late one night, the bell in the city's east rang. A warning. Fire flared in the docks. flames licking at tarred ropes and stacked casks of lamp oil. Panic threatened, but the new guard moved quickly. The Navy's ships doused the flames from the river, and a chain of bucket bearers, organized by the city's children, kept the blaze from spreading. At sunrise, Daenerys visited the scene herself, finding Tyrion already there, sleeves rolled up, helping sort ruined cargo. She knelt beside a weeping girl whose father had died in the flames and promised her a home in the Queen's house, a future in the new school. Was it an accident? Daenerys asked Tyrion as they surveyed the damage. He shook his head, jaw tight. A spark set by men from across the sea. I have a name. We will deal with it, quietly. Daenerys nodded. No spectacle. Let the people see not vengeance, but order. The men responsible were caught by dusk, tried in open court, and sentenced not to death, but to years of rebuilding the city they'd tried to burn. The people saw this, and murmured that the Queen's justice was both hard and fair. With the city secure, Daenerys looked outward once again. She sent new envoys to Bravos, seeking peace with the Iron Bank. She wrote to the free cities, inviting their merchants to the Queen's market. Slowly, steadily, the city grew rich. Not just in gold, but in trust, in law, in the easy mixing of old enemies at new tables. The Queen's school opened its doors before autumn, children of every class admitted by lottery. Tyrion gave the first lesson, a history of King's Landing, equal parts tragedy and jest. The children laughed and listened, and Daenerys, watching from the doorway, felt tears prick her eyes. This is the seed, she whispered to Sansa, who stood beside her. One day, it will be a forest. The years unfurled, measured by festival and harvest, riot and reconciliation. The council changed. Davos retired to White Harbor, honored as a lord. Grey Worm took command of the city's navy, training new captains. Sansa returned to Winterfell to raise her own young council. Elia presided as master of ships, her fleet the pride of the narrow sea. Through it all, Daenerys ruled, not with fear or fire, but with listening, patience, and the help of friends. Tyrion's hair turned white and he grew slower, but his wit remained as keen as ever. He spent his afternoons in the school, reading to children, telling them stories of old battles and hard-won peace. One spring, as a fresh generation filled the markets and the school, Daenerys called the council together in the gardens. The air was sweet with orange blossoms. The city below shone gold and green. It is time, she said, for the council to govern in truth as well as name. The city's fate must not rest in a single hand, not even mine. Meow. There was debate, long and honest, but in the end, all agreed. The Council of the Realm became law. A body chosen by lords and people both, its decrees binding. Daenerys kept the title of queen, but now she was first among equals, her voice a guide, not a command. The people gathered in the dragon pit to witness the new order. Tyrion, his voice trembling only once, read the charter aloud. Daenerys stood in a crown of wildflowers, her face calm and proud. The cheers that rose from the crowd echoed off the city's walls, a sound of hope realized. That evening, she and Tyrion stood on the walls, watching the lanterns drift downriver. It is no longer only my city, Daenerys said. It is theirs. Tyrion smiled, weary and content, as it always should have been. The night deepened, filled with laughter, song, and the warm breath of spring. And below, where once dragonfire had raged, wildflowers now grew, fragile, defiant, enduring, testament to a queen who chose to build, not burn, and to a people who learned to trust the dawn. All Kani. Sunlight crept slowly across the sleeping city, gilding the domes and spires of King's Landing with the first blush of day. As the Queen's market roused, and the smells of baking and roasting meats drifted on the breeze, Daenerys stood by her window and breathed in the living warmth of her realm. The Red Keep itself seemed to have settled into a gentler rhythm. Where once every echo in the halls had sounded like a threat or an omen, now the hush was one of purpose and anticipation. Daenerys rose early, as was her habit, and wandered the corridors before the castle truly woke. She passed a pair of young pages, their boots thumping softly on the flags. and paused to listen to their chatter. They spoke of a contest in the new school, a test of reading, a prize of sweet cakes for the best. Daenerys smiled, unseen, and pressed a coin into their hands as she moved on. The stories of these small moments mattered as much as those of kings and wars. She knew now, better than ever, that peace was stitched together from such threads. The council convened as the sun topped the city's edge. Tyrion arrived with a new cane, ivory-tipped and engraved, a gift from the artisans of the Street of Silk, who had begun to send tokens of their respect in place of bribes. Sansa, returned from a brief journey north, brought letters and gifts from Winterfell, hard cheese, wax-sealed honey, and news that the Norse fields had never been so green. Davos, still hearty though his hair had gone silver, came with a bundle of petitions from the fishing villages. Elia, master of ships, carried a salt-stained map and a handful of black pearls from the islands near Dorne. As always, Daenerys presided with patience, inviting every voice. They discussed the coming summer's harvest, a surplus predicted by the city's new head of granaries, once a common baker, now a leader among equals. There were proposals for expanding the city's aqueducts, arguments over how to accommodate the swelling population, and debate about the first assembly of the new council of the realm, when talk turned to unrest in the Riverlands. A minor lord, refusing to honor the new laws. Daenerys listened to Tyrion's advice, but trusted her own judgment. "We will not meet arrogance with anger," she said. "Send a message of goodwill and an offer of mediation. Let him see that justice is no longer a sword, but a hand extended." So it was done. The queen's messengers rode, and in time word returned. The lord relented, sending tribute and an apology, won not by threat, but by the soft, persistent weight of a peace too broad and deep to resist. After the council, Daenerys rode through the city with only a handful of guards. She visited the school, where children recited poems and quarreled over the histories of the old kings. She sat among the bakers as they kneaded dough and listened to tales of the city's earliest mornings. She stopped in the temple gardens, where wildflowers and herbs had overtaken the graves, and listened as an old septa sang prayers in 3 tongues. It was there, sitting in the shade, that Tyrion found her. He came slowly, wincing with each step but refusing help. "You seem far away, Your Grace," he said, lowering himself beside her. "Not far," she replied. "Just listening." Tyrion watched the children play among the headstones, laughter chasing the birds away. "You have taught them to love what they once feared," he said. "That is no small magic." Daenerys smiled, then turned serious. "You think it will last?" He shrugged. "It will last as long as there are those willing to tend it. Peace is not a statue, it's a garden. Needs weeding, watering, sometimes a little fence, and a watchful eye." They sat in companionable silence, Daenerys thinking of gardens, of roots, thorns, of sunlight and sudden frost. Trouble came, as it always did, in ways both expected and new. In the city's east, a fever swept the alleys, sending crowds to the new clinics. Daenerys ordered more healers and fresh water brought in, and Tyrion dispatched volunteers from the Queen's School to help. Sansa suggested sending food and warm blankets, and Elia had a warehouse open to those in need. The outbreak passed more quickly than any had hoped. The people saw that the Queen's care did not end at the palace walls, and rumors of her kindness grew in the outlying villages. When a band of would-be usurpers tried to stir unrest, their plans found little purchase. They were discovered not by the Queen's spies, but by a merchant who reported them, certain now that the crown cared more for the city's peace than for old scores. In the lull that followed, Daenerys turned her eyes westward. The Iron Islands requested a seat at the next assembly, and Asha Greyjoy sailed upriver to meet her, banners streaming. The two women spoke long into the night of salt and storm, of freedom, and the cost of belonging to something larger than blood and bone. Daenerys promised the Ironborn would have a voice, if they would give up the last of their raids and send their youngest sons and daughters to the Queen's School. Asha agreed, and when she sailed home, her ships carried grain, coin, and the first books many islands had ever seen. As summer deepened, the city swelled with visitors, traders from the free cities, shepherds from the Dornish hills, farmers from the green heart of the Reach. The markets flourished, the temples overflowed at festival. Tyrion, never far from the center, managed crowds and quarrels with jokes and sharp warnings. Sansa took to hosting the wives and daughters of lords, teaching them to read and write, and inviting them to council as observers. One day, Daenerys stood atop the city's highest tower, watching the tides of life below. Beside her, Tyrion marveled aloud at how the city had grown. "It is more than I could ever have imagined," he admitted, voice quiet. "Not just stone and mortar, but a spirit. Something new, born of all that we survived." Daenerys was silent a while. "It is not only my doing, Tyrion. You, Davos, Sansa, Elia, the children, the people themselves. We did it together." "Mal." He inclined his head. "Perhaps that is the secret. We built it together, so no one person can tear it down. There were moments of sadness too. The old gave way to the new. Davos, after many years, grew tired of city life and returned to the sea, honored by the people and the court. Grey Worm, older and more at peace, took his unsullied and sailed east to build a new city of their own on the shores of Slaver's Bay, leaving behind a letter of gratitude and a promise to return if ever needed. Sansa's daughter, red-haired and sharp-tongued, joined the Queen's school as a student, and Daenerys herself taught her to read High Valyrian. The days passed in a blur of lessons, council, walks in the gardens, and quiet evenings spent with Tyrion beside the fire, sharing memories and hopes. The first assembly of the realm convened under the open sky in the Dragon Pit, now a vast amphitheater lined with flowers and banners. Lords and commons sat together. No walls, no divisions. Daenerys addressed them not from a throne, but from the center, her cloak dusted with pollen, her eyes steady. "The city stands because you chose to build, not burn," she told them. "Let this be our legacy, that we cared for one another, that we listened, that we endured. Let no one be forgotten, and let every voice be heard." Cheers rose, echoing through the city. Tyrion, watching from the side, wiped away a tear, his heart swelling with pride and sorrow. The days lengthened. Children born after the fire grew to youth in streets where their parents had once fled for their lives. New songs were written, new laws inscribed on the city's gates. Daenerys' hair turned silver white as the moon, but her eyes never lost their fire. And when the time came, when the city could stand without her hand to guide it, she stepped back, leaving the council to govern, walking once more in the gardens, at peace at last. Tyrion found her there one evening, as dusk painted the sky in gold and violet. "Will you ever write your own story?" he asked. Daenerys smiled. "It is not for me to write. It belongs to them, to you, to all who believed peace was possible." He sat with her as the bells began to ring, the city below alive with light and laughter. "Then let it be a long story," he said, raising his cup. Daenerys nodded, and together they watched the city's future stretch out before them, bright and wild and full of hope. Gakal. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 940 on Katu, 33. FD Feb 6, 717 Bini. K. Man. A golden dawn stretched over the rooftops and turrets of King's Landing, the sky as clear as a promise. The air was cool, scented with honeysuckle and fresh bread, the bells calling out the hour in peals of silver. Along the street of flour, vendors stacked new loaves and pies, and everywhere people lingered in laughter or hurried with baskets to the Queen's Market. No longer did guards stride with menace or look away from the poor. Instead, the city moved as one, vigilant, imperfect, alive. Daenerys woke in her chambers to the quiet murmur of the city's heart. Her handmaids, older now, and as much friends as servants, helped her dress in simple blue, her silver hair woven with a single wildflower. Today was the day of the Spring Assembly, a celebration of the city's governance and the coming year's hopes. Outside her window, flags of every house fluttered. Wolf and Rose, Lion and Kraken, Falcon and Sun, each a signal of the peace so many had thought impossible. She took breakfast alone on her balcony, looking over the city with both affection and detachment. Tyrion arrived a little later, pausing to tap his cane on the stone. His beard had grown snowy, his eyes keen as ever. He brought news, petitions from the southern coast, a complaint from a Braavosi merchant, and an unsigned poem praising the Queen's market and cursing the price of Dornish lemons. "They call you the People's Queen," he said, sliding the notes onto her table. "And some say your wildflowers are more powerful than a dragon's fire. I'm inclined to agree. Less trouble to feed at any rate." She smiled, sipping her tea. "And what of you, Tyrion? Will you ever take up a more restful life?" He smirked, settling into the sun. "I would not know what to do with rest. Besides, I enjoy being the hand to a legend, one with rather good taste in flowers." Before midday, the council assembled. They met now in a round chamber below the Red Keep, the walls painted with scenes of city life. A fisherman at dawn, a healer in her garden, children learning beneath a spreading oak. Elia of Dorne arrived first, her eyes bright, hair cropped short. She carried a scroll of naval accounts and a handful of seashells, gifts from the children who sailed with her fleet. Sansa entered with her daughter, the young girl carrying ledgers and a smile too wise for her years. Davos, called back from retirement to mediate a dispute among the dockworkers, joked about missing the sea but was in truth content. The newest member, a one-armed baker's son from Flea Bottom, carried petitions from the Queen's school and asked questions in a voice that trembled with pride. They discussed roads and ships, the year's plantings and the coming assembly. The harvest would be plentiful, the market richer than ever. But Tyrion, as always, warned caution. "Peace is not a fence," he said, "but a path through wild country. Every year we walk it, we must watch for roots and rocks." Daenerys nodded, weighing every word. She had come to understand the limits of power, the wisdom of patience. "Let us keep walking," she said, "and let the people walk beside us." The city prepared for the spring assembly with song and banners. The streets filled with music, fiddles, drums, singers from the Summer Islands and the Vale. Tradesmen decorated their doors with garlands. Children skipped in parades, faces painted with the symbols of their homes. The city's poor ate well, every table and corner bursting with bread and fruit and salted fish, the Queen's kitchens open to all. At the Dragon Pit, now a vast hall for gatherings, people crowded in. The council sat not on a dais, but at ground level, surrounded by the voices and faces of the city. Daenerys stood only when all were quiet, her bearing calm and unhurried. "We have come far together," she said, voice carrying to the rafters. "And we are not finished. Peace is a work of many hands. Every road we build, every child we teach, every quarrel we settle, these are the stones of our city. Let us set them together with care and courage for those who come after us." Applause broke out, not thunderous but deeply felt, the gratitude of those who knew what it was to lose and to regain hope. In the weeks that followed, the city's life moved forward. The Queen's School sent its first class of graduates into apprenticeships and learning halls. The new gardens along the river bloomed with wildflowers, tended by a guild of orphans who called themselves the Queen's Children. Sansa returned to Winterfell, leaving her daughter as counselor and friend, and promising that the North would send grain, wool, and stories. Davos resumed his walks among the sailors, always ready with a kind word or a sharp rebuke. Trouble, as always, crept at the edges. Along the Gold Road, bandits from the old days tried to rekindle old ways. The city's new guards, men and women of every house and no house at all, met them not with swords alone, but with offers of food and honest work. Most took the chance. A few vanished and the land grew safer for all. From the east came news of a failed plot against the city's trade. The Braavosi merchant who had once complained now sent a ship full of books and a promise of lower tariffs. The merchant's daughter, a clever girl with ink-stained hands, stayed behind to study at the Queen's School and soon became a fixture in the city's new life. In the quiet of the evenings, Daenerys and Tyrion walked the gardens or sat by the fire. They spoke less of the past and more of what was possible. "I thought dragons were my destiny," Daenerys said once. "But perhaps it was only this. To plant, to tend, to watch a city grow. Tyrion looked at her, a wry smile tugging his lips. Dragons are fire and blood, but wildflowers, those are the proof of true victory, and they do not burn as easily. The years passed, each marked by the ringing of the city's bells, by weddings and births, by new towers raised and old wounds healed. The council changed hands. New voices joined, young and eager, as the old withdrew to quieter labors. Sansa's daughter married a merchant's son, their union blessed in every temple, their children raised in both the north and the city. As age settled on Daenerys and Tyrion, they became figures of legend, loved, sometimes argued with, always respected. The children of the city vied to bring them new poems and wildflowers, knowing the queen kept every gift in a chest by her bed. On summer nights, Daenerys would walk the city's walls with Tyrion, looking down at the river, the gardens, the lights blooming like fireflies across the stones. One night, as autumn crept in and the leaves turned copper and gold, Daenerys asked Tyrion, "Did we do enough?" He paused, leaning on the parapet, and let the silence stretch. Then, softly, "We did what we could with what we had. That is all anyone can ask." She smiled, content. "Then let the story go on, with or without us." In time, Daenerys passed her crown to the council and became simply Lady Daenerys of the Gardens, tending flowers and teaching children to read and dream. Tyrion retired to a small house above the market, where laughter and the smell of baking bread drifted through the open windows. The city mourned, then celebrated as new generations took up the work they had begun. King's Landing endured, not in glory or in fear, but in the steady hum of daily hope, the song sung in every tongue, the wildflowers blooming where dragons once soared. And at the heart of it all was the memory of a queen who had chosen to build, and a hand who had chosen to believe. The story carried on, written in 1,000 lives, 1,000 dawns, each a promise renewed. IG. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 940 Nesio Matsubat WAP 71820 SJC. 1AK. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 940 on 19,769 AB 70 beyond. Olga. The sun's warmth mellowed as it arced higher over King's Landing, casting amber light over the market squares and tiled roofs, catching on the glassy surface of the Blackwater and turning each window pane into a fleeting spark. The city felt full, not only of its own pulse but with visitors, merchants from Volantis with ships full of wine and rare dyes, hedge knights from the Reach eager for a place in the Queen's Guard, singers and tradesmen from the north, all drawn by the spring assembly's lingering celebrations and the stories of peace that had taken root as far as the shivering sea. Daenerys walked the city most mornings, sometimes alone, sometimes with a page or a counselor beside her. The children were never afraid. They ran to her, offered garlands and jokes, asked if she had ever seen a real dragonfly above the Red Keep. She smiled, sometimes told them tales of old Valyria, and always listened to their troubles with the patience of one who had known fear and hunger herself. The people had begun to call her simply the mother, never just of dragons, but of gardens, of orphans, of the city itself. She visited the Queen's school and watched as girls and boys recited their lessons. The teachers now came from every corner of Westeros and beyond, their robes and accents as varied as their stories. Some of the best students, once orphaned by war or plague, now taught the younger ones. Daenerys was often invited to listen to their debates. Over history, over justice, over what made a good ruler. And she cherished their sharp minds and their defiance, so different from the cowed silence that had once filled these halls. In council, the table had changed again, the old hands guiding the new. Tyrion sat a little further from the center, content to offer a jest or a nudge, letting Elia of Dorne and Sansa's daughter lead the arguments over trade, defense, and diplomacy. The baker's son, now a counselor in his own right, brought matters of the markets, while an iron-born captain, Asha's niece, spoke for the sea. They faced trouble, of course. The Westerlands grumbled about tariffs and asked for more say in river traffic. The Braavosi merchant guilds, seeing the prosperity of the Queen's market, tried to force better terms and sent a delegation both arrogant and sly. Tyrion met them with wit, Elia with naval strength, and Daenerys with an open invitation to tour the city's poorest quarters before any bargains were struck. By the time the Braavosi departed, their letters were less demanding and their tone respectful. The greatest challenge was one of memory, not arms. There were always those who remembered only the blood and fire, who saw the wild flowers and laughter and thought them fleeting, who whispered that dragons could never truly sleep. Daenerys did not hide from this. She spoke openly in market and council of what the city had been and what it had cost to change. "It is easy to forget suffering," she said once to a crowd outside the rebuilt sept. "But we do not honor the dead by hiding our scars. We build on them. We remember, so we do not return." The city learned. Every autumn, they held a night of silence, each family setting a candle in the window to remember those lost loved ones, friends, even enemies, so that grief became not a wound, but a part of the city's living heart. Years deepened. Tyrion's hair grew as white as frost, his steps slower, his jokes more poignant. Still, he remained at Daenerys' side in moments both solemn and light. Once, when a storm nearly tore the banners from the dragon pit, Tyrion helped the youngest counselors rehang them, laughing as the rain soaked his robes. "You're no less a lion for having mud on your boots," Daenerys teased. "And you, your grace, are no less a dragon for choosing wildflowers over flames." He coughed, covering a shortness of breath that Daenerys noticed, but did not name. Instead, she sent the baker's son with hot wine and a cloak, and Tyrion, grumbling fondly, accepted both. In the city, new guilds flourished. Healers, builders, a circle of storytellers who met beneath the trees in the new city gardens. The Queen's School began to train healers and scribes for the outlying towns, sending them out with bags of seed and books bound in tooled leather, each stamped with the seal of the city and a wild flower pressed within its first pages. When Sansa's daughter announced her betrothal, a gentle union, built more on respect than alliance, the city celebrated with a week of song and feasts. Daenerys presided in a garland of marigolds, Tyrion at her side, holding court with a wry smile and a glass of rich arbor gold. The lords of the North and the Reach toasted together, and even the Ironborn captain was drawn into a dance that lasted until the bells rang in the morning. But change was always close behind. As summer ripened, Daenerys felt her age in her bones and knew the time would come soon for her to let go, fully and finally, of the reins she had held for so long. She summoned the council to the garden on the day the first apricots blushed gold. The air was fragrant with honeysuckle and thyme, the city quiet in anticipation. She stood in a simple dress, her silver hair plaited with ribbons, her eyes steady. "You all know why I have called you," she began. "The time comes when the garden needs a new hand. I will step back and let the council rule as it was meant to do, with all voices equal, all hearts intent on peace." Daenerys. They objected, of course, Tyrion most of all, his voice rough with emotion. But Daenerys was firm, her resolve gentle but unyielding. "I've planted what I could. Now it is for others to tend and harvest. I will remain, if you wish, as a guide, a teacher, a friend. But the crown must be lighter, and the city stronger, than any one woman's will." And so it was done. The council chose its speaker from among them, a woman who had come to King's Landing as a child of the street, raised and educated by the city itself. Tyrion, too frail for much public work, retired to his small house above the market, where he entertained children with tales of dragons, laughter echoing from his open window. Daenerys found a quiet rhythm. She walked the gardens and riverbanks, taught history at the Queen's School, and visited the sick in the city's clinics. She became a living legend, a presence both awe-inspiring and gentle, sought out by travelers and city folk alike for advice, or simply the touch of her hand. In late summer, as wild poppies spread through the old ruins, Daenerys sat with Tyrion in the shade of an orange tree. His breath was short, but his eyes were bright. "You made a city of peace, Daenerys," he said, voice thin but proud. "I only helped you see it was possible." She took his hand, her own work-worn and warm. "You did more than that, old friend. You taught me that peace was not something to seize, but to nurture." Now, they sat together, watching the children race through the gardens. Their laughter, the city's true anthem. In time, Daenerys' story became less her own, and more the city's, a legacy of small mercies and great courage, of wildflowers rooted in the cracks of broken stone, of scars made beautiful by endurance. King's Landing lived. The market bells rang, and each day, the city remade itself in joy and struggle and hope. The wildflowers bloomed, the rivers ran clear, and in the memory of the people, told in stories, sung in lullabies, woven into garlands and prayers, the mother's peace endured, stronger than fire, gentler than the dawn, eternal as the river and the sea. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 940 on 49 E50 727 by 9. Okay. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941s. 7A200 and 48 31s and 11 by 9. The slow glide of autumn touched the city with gold. Leaves gathered in corners of the market squares and drifted down from the gardens high on the Red Keep slopes. In the morning, mists curled along the black water, turning the towers to pale ghosts until the sun lifted and scattered the haze. The city moved with a calm assurance, and neither languid nor frantic, but alive and awake, each district pulsing with its own music. Daenerys moved quietly through this new season, less a queen than a gardener or a wise woman of the lanes. She wore no crown, only a cloak against the chill and a garland of late-blooming marigolds. People recognized her still, the straightness of her bearing, the kindness in her eyes. But they no longer knelt. They bowed, they offered her a seat by their fires. They pressed gifts of apples and bread and sometimes small troubles for her advice. In the Queen's School, she taught a lesson on the seasons of the city, showing children how every change brought both loss and possibility. She read to them of the free cities, of old Valyria, of dragons and the turning of wheels, always returning to the stories of ordinary folk, the healers, the bakers, the sailors and scribes, who shaped the city as surely as any king or queen. One cool morning, Daenerys climbed to the top of the city's eastern wall, where Tyrion was waiting, his face pink in the brisk wind, a cup of spiced wine warming his hands. His hair was snow-white now, his wit as bright as ever, his laughter soft but never far from the surface. "They say you have a dozen apprentices now," he teased as she joined him, "and that the children run wild in the library after your lessons. Are you turning the city into a roost for bookish dragons?" She smiled, sitting beside him, drawing her cloak tight. "Let them run wild. There is more danger in silent halls than in loud ones. We both learned that." They watched the city in silence a while. The boats on the river, the bustle of the Queen's Market, the ribbons of smoke curling from the bakeries, the old temple bells ringing out the hour. The people moved like a tide, always shifting, but never washing away what they had built. Below, preparations for the harvest feast took shape. The council had chosen this year to hold the celebration in the open, along the main avenues, with food and games in every quarter. Asha Greyjoy's niece arrived with a dozen barrels of salted cod. Elia of Dorne sent baskets of late grapes and sweet figs. From the north came casks of honeyed ale and sheaves of golden wheat. Tyrion oversaw the final arrangements, dispatching pages and laughing as the children tried to teach him a new dance from the Summer Island. The festival began with a procession through the city, not of armored knights or priests, but of the city's children, each carrying a single candle and a handful of wildflowers. At the head walked Daenerys, Tyrion at her side, the council scattered among the crowd. Old and young, high and low, they mingled in a weaving river of light and laughter. As the sun set, the city glowed with lanterns. Daenerys gave a short speech from the steps of the new council hall. her words simple and direct. We live not in fear but in hope, not for ourselves alone but for all who call this city home. Let us eat together, work together, and remember together our losses, our labors, and our dreams. There was no applause, only a shared hush, and then the clatter of plates, the music rising, the feast begun. Through the evening, Daenerys moved among the tables, breaking bread with a stonemason's widow, listening to the story of a new apprentice at the Healers Guild, laughing at a joke from a boy who claimed to have outsmarted Tyrion in chess. She felt the city's heart in these moments, not grand, but deep and enduring. Tyrion watched her from a distance, sometimes joining, sometimes content to observe. He shared old stories with the children, teaching them to play at politics and riddles. When the fire dancers began, he was pulled into their circle by the baker's son, and for a time he moved as lightly as any youth. After the feast, as the city drifted towards sleep, Daenerys and Tyrion walked along the old city walls. The night was clear, the river a ribbon of moonlight below. Tyrion was quiet, but when he spoke his voice was gentle. "Did you ever think it would end like this?" he asked. "No banners, no crowns, only peace, and the laughter of children." Daenerys shook her head. "I never dared to hope for so much. I thought the best I could do was survive. But now, look at them. The city will outlive us both, and that is enough." And Tyrion raised his cup, a silent toast. They stood together in companionable silence, the city's future spread below them like a garden ready for spring. The months that followed brought new changes. The council met every fortnight in the Round Hall, presided over by Sansa's daughter, now confident and wise beyond her years. New voices joined, an apprentice healer from Flea Bottom, a scribe from the docks, a merchant's widow from the city's east gate. Each brought their own troubles and hopes, and the council listened, debated, and built. Daenerys continued her rounds, teaching, advising, tending the sick. In the Queen's school, she planted a row of trees with the children, one for each year of peace since the last war. She spoke at every assembly, reminding all that every voice mattered, and that the greatest danger to peace was forgetting why it had been sought in the first place. Trouble, when it came, was met with the strength of habit and the unity of purpose. When a brief drought threatened the crops, the council organized water caravans from the river, rationing supplies and rewarding those who shared. When a rumor of plague spread from the docks, the healers worked day and night to contain it, the city closing ranks, not in fear, but in resolve. Each time, Daenerys was there, her presence a reassurance, her hands as ready for work as any laborer's. Tyrion, his strength waning, spent more time at his window, writing letters, receiving visitors, teaching the oldest students the arts of debate and gentle mockery. His laughter remained, and his love for the city never dimmed. In his last days, Daenerys visited him often, bringing news and flowers, sharing quiet reminiscences of their first days in King's Landing. "Promise me you'll keep walking the city," he said one evening, voice little more than a whisper. "Promise me you'll never let them forget how fragile it all is." She promised, and held his hand until he slept. The city mourned his passing with lanterns and stories, his wit and wisdom woven into the life of the council, and the songs sung in every tavern. Daenerys spoke at his memorial in the Queen's garden, telling the children that Tyrion Lannister had been the cleverest of hands and the truest of friends. As the years pressed on, the city grew and changed. The Queen's school expanded, its graduates traveling to distant towns, bringing knowledge and hope. The city's guilds flourished, welcoming new members from every land. The old wounds of the realm faded, though never completely healed, and each year the children of King's Landing set wildflowers upon the city walls in memory and gratitude. In time, Daenerys grew old, her steps slower, but her gaze unclouded. She became not just the mother of the city, but its memory and conscience. Her stories were told in every home, her wisdom a touchstone for those who led after her. On the last evening of her life, Daenerys sat beneath the oldest tree in the Queen's garden, surrounded by children and friends, the city humming with life beyond the walls. She watched the lanterns drifting down the river, listened to the laughter and song, and felt the peace she had planted blooming everywhere around her. And when the dawn came, gentle and golden, King's Landing awoke to find itself, for the first time in living memory, entirely at peace. The wildflowers bloomed. The city endured, its story ever growing. A garden in the heart of Westeros, flourishing because one queen had chosen not to rule with fear, but with hope, and because a people, given the chance, had chosen to believe. Kate. Long shadows slipped over the city's rooftops as another year yielded quietly to the next. The bells of King's Landing sang out for the day's end, their sound no longer a warning, but a comfort, an old familiar tune woven into every heart. The evening air was scented with wood smoke and sweet fruits, drifting from open windows and the many little fires that dotted the gardens, courtyards, and lanes. Daenerys Targaryen moved as a silent presence among her people. She needed no guards now. Her dignity was as natural as breath, her steps as steady as the seasons. Her hair, once bright as burnished silver, was cut short and soft, threaded with white, a crown fashioned only of years. In the city, she was as likely to be found sitting beside an old fisherman on the quay as speaking at the council hall, her cloak dusted with the dust and petals of the city's gardens. When she paused to rest on a shaded bench, a child would often appear with a story, a song, or a wildflower. Always the wildflowers, growing everywhere now, as if the earth itself had finally relaxed. The council had changed once again. Sansa's daughter, now called Lady Mireia of the Northern River, sat at its center, her words clear and considered, her gaze unflinching. Elia of Dorne, her hair streaked with sun and gray, was master of ships and still fond of telling stories about storms. The baker's son presided over matters of trade and labor, his hands rough but his mind sharp, never letting anyone forget the people who worked before dawn to keep the city fed. The Iron Islands captain had become a legend, sailing all the way to Old Town and back each summer, returning with tales and gifts for the city's children. Trouble, always a familiar guest, arrived more rarely and with less force. There was a summer drought, met with swift action. Water brought upriver, new wells dug, gardens replanted for the next year's bloom. A small fire in the warehouses was contained before it could threaten more than a few sacks of grain. Sometimes, a petty feud flared between guilds or neighbors, but these were settled in open forum, with a handful of counselors and a few clever children from the Queen's school acting as mediators. Daenerys spent her mornings in the Queen's garden, where she tended the oldest tree with slow, careful hands. It had grown huge and wild, its branches a shelter for songbirds and climbing children. Sometimes she sat beneath it with a book or a bundle of letters, reading the latest dispatches from towns and villages across the realm. They wrote to her, as if to a grandmother, stories of marriages, harvests, and the naming of new wells or streets. Some sent seeds or pressed flowers. Others wrote of problems, asking for her advice. She answered as she could, sometimes sending a quick reply in her careful hand, sometimes traveling to the edges of the city to listen in person. In the afternoons, she visited the Queen's school, where she read aloud or simply listened as the students debated some question of justice or history. She was no longer a teacher, but she remained their most honored guest, the children bringing her wildflowers and riddles, eager to make her smile. The curriculum had grown to include science and philosophy, crafts and medicine, even the histories of distant lands. A great map had been painted on the wall, its edges filled with the names and drawings of every student who had passed through those doors. The city was not perfect, but it was at peace. The harbor bustled with ships of every size, their cargoes as varied as their crews. The markets overflowed with fruit, cheese, and the bright dyes from the east. In the evenings, laughter floated from the taverns and open squares, where singers and dancers entertained crowds until the moon rose high. On festival days, Daenerys still led the candle procession. The streets would fill with light, and people, old and young, rich and poor, walked together, sharing bread and stories as they went. Sometimes she told her own tales, the narrow streets of Marine, the long road to the wall, the nights in exile with only hope to keep her warm. Always she ended with the same words, spoken gently into the dusk. We are the city's heart. So long as we care for each other, the city endures. The city's children took those words to heart. They planted wildflowers wherever stones were broken, or ground left bare. They built small shrines, simple altars with garlands and candles, at corners and crossroads, honoring the city's peace and the memory of those who had made it possible. The council, too, adapted. They invited traveling healers and scholars, held open debates in the dragon pit, welcomed every voice, no matter how soft or strange. One winter, as frost silvered the river and the nights stretched long, Daenerys fell ill. The healers came, bringing warm cloths and infusions, but she waved them off with a wry smile. "Let me rest and listen," she said. "It is enough." For weeks, she received visitors, old counselors, the first students of the Queen's school, now scholars, craftsmen and healers in their own right, sailors from the Iron Islands, gardeners and children with armfuls of winter roses. They told her what had become of the city and what new things they dreamed of building. She listened to each, her eyes bright, her words few but always gentle. On the coldest night of that winter, a hush settled on the city. The bells rang softly at midnight. Lights flickered in every window, and the wildflowers that had bloomed so late and stubbornly were laid in every street. Children gathered at the garden's gate, candles in hand, their faces upturned in the moonlight. Daenerys slipped away in her sleep, her hands folded over a bouquet of marigolds and river lilies. She looked peaceful, her lips parted in a last small smile, as if dreaming of the city's laughter. At dawn, the council and all the people of the city gathered in the Queen's garden. Lady Miria spoke not of endings, but of the work left to do, of the schools, the gardens, the roads, and the endless labor of peace. The city was silent for a moment, and then, as the sun rose, the children placed wildflowers along the garden paths, singing the old songs Daenerys had taught them. The bells rang all day, and every year thereafter. On that morning, the city remembered. Her legacy lived on not in statues or in stone, but in the living heart of King's Landing, in the laughter of children at the Queen's school, the wildflowers growing where fire had once raged, the justice dispensed in open council, and the simple daily kindness of neighbors. The story of Daenerys Targaryen became the story of the city itself. How hope, once planted in the ashes, could rise and bloom, and how the gentlest rule could outlast all fear and fury. And so, the city endured, gentle and strong, held together by memory, by hope, and by the wildflowers that blossomed in every corner year after year, as long as the bells still rang. Lakshi. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 940 on if 995 E8, A487 A Bean. Lakshi. Bonanda. Unusual activity has been detected from your device. Try again later. 941 46,281 BC Fords, S7 36 BI. India Dao, Enishtan Tebiso. Spring returned to King's Landing, not as a single sudden moment, but as a slow brightening that crept through the city's bones. The gardens unfurled, green and unruly, and the river quickened with snowmelt and the promise of trade. Trees blossomed along the Queen's Walk, their branches dripping petals onto the heads of laughing children. And everywhere the wildflowers, daffodil, violet, marigold, cornflower, bloomed defiantly in the cracks of old stone. In the weeks after Daenerys' death, the city moved at first in hush and shadow, each person marking the loss in their own quiet way. For 3 days the bells did not ring, and every window bore a simple wildflower, its petals pressed against glass as a silent offering. At night, the city gathered in the Queen's garden, where 1,000 candles were lit for the Queen who had chosen kindness over conquest, hope over fear. Lady Mireia of the Northern River took the council's center seat, her voice steady, her manner learned in the school of Daenerys' gentle command. She presided with neither crown nor banner, but with the unspoken authority of one who had seen how easily order could become tyranny, and how easily hope could fade if left untended. The council itself was a tapestry of the city. Elia of Dorne with her salt and pepper hair and shrewd humor. The baker's son, now a father himself, speaking always for the markets and the guilds. A healer from the Queen's school, whose quick eyes missed nothing and whose hands carried both courage and compassion. They governed in the open, with doors thrown wide, voices from every corner of the city joining in debate and decision. Each week, The council moved to a different square. 1 week in the shadow of the Red Keep, another among the shipyards, another in the gardens, where Daenerys had planted the first apple trees. There were no secrets kept. Even the youngest apprentice might stand and offer a grievance or a dream. It was not a city without trouble. Twice, storms swept the Blackwater and battered the eastern docks, threatening the Springs trade. Lady Elia sent the navy upriver, not with swords but with rope and wood, turning warships into rescue barges, and the people labored day and night to repair the wharves. There was a fire in the tannery district, and for 2 days the air stank of smoke and burnt leather. But the council's new fire brigades, organized by the Queen's School, stamped out the blaze, and neighbors rebuilt with stone and lime, lending each other tools and song. There were harder seasons too. A fever spread through the poorest alleys, carried on damp spring winds. The healers opened clinics in the streets, and the council imposed a pause on the markets, sending food and water to every home. Lady Mireia herself went from house to house, bringing books and hope, and sitting with the dying, as Daenerys had once done. When the fever faded, the city emerged thinner, changed, but more closely bound, grief shared and tempered by the kindness of strangers. Stories of the Queen became stories of the city. At every assembly, someone would begin, "I remember the day the mother listened to my quarrel," or "I saw her plant the first seeds in the old ash pit," or "My father swore she forgave him, though he'd once fought against her." The children of the Queen's School composed a song that began as a lullaby and ended in a chorus of hope, and the tune lingered long after the candles had burned down. Mireia led not alone but in chorus. The merchant's widow who had survived 2 sieges, the stonemason's daughter with hands calloused by labor, the young iron-born captain who sailed up from Pike with a ship full of apprentices and gifts. They all had their place on the council, their say in the city's future. Even the old lords who visited from the countryside, once wary and proud, returned home changed, speaking of a city where justice and mercy were more than words. Year after year, the city rebuilt itself, never the same, but never unrecognizable. The Queen's School became the city's heart, its doors open to all, its lessons reaching as far as the fishing villages and the smallest holdfasts in the hills. The council's records grew in great ledgers, accounts of law and harvest, of disputes settled and marriages celebrated, of winters survived and springs welcomed. The children who played in the gardens grew to fill the council's seats and the city's workshops. Their memories twined with those of Daenerys, whose image, never cast in bronze, but painted in hundreds of hands, watched from the walls with quiet pride. Each year, on the anniversary of her passing, the city gathered in the Queen's garden. They brought wildflowers and stories, not of battles or dragons, but of laughter, forgiveness, and the ordinary miracles of daily life. They walked together through the city, past the old Red Keep, past the gardens and markets and the great open school, leaving petals in their wake, filling the air with song and memory. The land around King's Landing flourished. The Reach sent barrels of apples and cheese. The North sent wool and honey. The Dothraki came on occasion, bringing horses and trading stories around the bonfires. In time, the old rumors of rebellion faded, for the city had become a place where even the most distant traveler could find a welcome and a voice. Children born this new spring grew up with the tales of Daenerys, not as a conqueror, but as the mother of renewal. They played at council in the squares, taking turns to settle the disputes of imaginary citizens. They tended the wildflowers, defended the weak, and learned to read and write in the Queen's School, their world shaped by the steady work of peace. As decades slipped past, the city's face changed, but the soul endured. Banners faded and were replaced. The council turned over, the elders stepping aside for those who had grown up in the light of hope. In the evenings, as the bells rang and lanterns flickered across the water, old and young gathered to share bread, to laugh and remember. Their stories always circled back to the Queen who had taught them that power was not fire, but the quiet strength to listen, forgive, and build. In the quiet of dawn, the first petals of spring fell in the Queen's garden, and a little girl with hair like silver knelt to plant a new seed beside the oldest tree. She did not know the world of war, only the world that Daenerys had left behind. As she pressed the earth and sang a bit of the Queen's song under her breath, the city's story continued, stronger and softer than steel. Alive in every blooming wildflower, every lesson learned, every kindness offered, the city endured. The bells rang for weddings and harvests, for new ships launched, and for the quiet passing of the old. Wildflowers grew where dragons had once raged, and the promise of Daenerys' reign, rooted in forgiveness and hope, blossomed again and again, each spring a fresh beginning, each heart a home for the city's unending, gentle dream.